Fundamentals of Mixing, lesson number 13, mapping your mix, creating a vision and approach. One thing I want to do here just very quickly, because with all the gain structure or gain restructuring, if you will, what's happened is I've kind of gone through and my levels have gone askew. So I want to kind of rebalance some of this stuff out here, and I'm going to kind of skip around and work through some of the basic elements of the mix here, and let's just see, kind of set a structure for everything. So let's just see. All right, so let's see. I got this on my. There we go. All right, go back here. So if you can't tell, I'm putting on a work surface here, just kind of laying out some. Alright, so I'm going to scroll down here. There's another track here that the rim shot. So that reverse snare part, I just want to mix in just enough just to get the vibe of it. Like if I overmix it, it gets lost in the groove. And let's see, we're down to the stick. I'm not sure I'm going to leave these pan positions here, but okay. That's over here. And then there's also some kick build stuff. Let's just see what that's like. There's also, just go in order here, I also have like a reverse cymbal thing. Might be some reverse enveloping I need to do there. Meaning that it may be like the build that was programmed in may not work. I'm not going to overmix anything here. I just want to kind of get everything to kind of, like, I don't want this to overwhelm the flow of the beat. Like, right, or taking away the actual gain on the bass of the kick drum, especially. All right. A down riser, as I found out in my edification of posting videos on YouTube. Which seems like an oxymoron, right? Down riser. Alright, another guitar here. Let's see, go on, there's two guitars here. I'm going to explain more about what I'm doing here and how I'm gauging these things in the levels and panning section. And then we got a lead vocal here. That's the ad lib track.
Together we can use style.
All right, so no effects here, but I mean, all this stuff is dry at this point, so we're going to talk about this. Right, so that build part, background vocals. So the hook there is just like a classic, like R&B kind of track, is the background vocal. That's the hook of the track, and then the vocals just ad-libbing over the top of that.
Ain't no stop, just you and
Okay, so what I want to talk about here in terms of mix mapping in approach is laying out a basic idea of the sonic signature that we want to add onto this and where we want to place things. So I'm thinking that for this, I want to give it a bit of a vintage kind of vibe, but also with some modern elements, because you have some more EDM, downrisers and uprisers and sirens. Well, it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to have like sirens or something in a 70s disco kind of thing, but I want to kind of give it a vintage flavor. Now, the thing is that when you approach a mix, you can stylistically look at things and say, hey, I want this to be really modern and edgy. Like maybe I want it to be more EDM style in terms of the approach, or I want to have like a certain vintage vibe aspect to it. Or maybe I want a little bit more of an R&B 80s kind of approach. And so one quick way to just lay out some of these basic things would be to, and this is just one quick method or one quick way of doing this, would be to kind of lay out some particular vibes with the track, just to kind of see what kind of tonal character or what kind of layout it would be. So let's just do this. Let's just take like I'm just going to go with Shep 73, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of lay this onto some tracks here on my stems, and so I want to, because I want to get like an idea or a vibe for what this is going to do just to my basic. Now, I'm not going to hear a whole lot of a thing here, but what I can do here is I can start to just kind of give it some, like a classic bump here, on the drums. So let's just see. Right, and now if I have like a guitars, maybe I poke out a little bit of a. Am I on the right one? So this is just like a really very rough EQ, where I'm kind of bringing in some warmth and a little bit of tonal character into it, primarily all boosts. And it's not about like getting everything to be perfect. So here, after doing the gain structure thing, I got all my gain structure off. All right, so let me make good on that a little bit and pull these down a couple dB. And I want to see if this gives like a kind of character that I want for the track. So I'm just doing something that I can test out really quick. and if I wanted to do something that on the dynamic end that might be like a good complement to this, I could set up something just to go for this. So I just want to see if this ends up being like a good approach, and if it is, we'll kind of move on, and if not, maybe we'll try out a couple of other things just to see what would be like a good way to mix this. So what I'm going to do here is
Would I keep winning? Yes, we're winning. When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah, it's just what we have to do to just claim the fame.
so the string parts, the sustained ones, are too loud in that build section.
That's just who we are. Trusting who you want us, that ain't nobody else. That's just who we are. Trusting who you want us, that ain't nobody else. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you want us, that ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you want us, that ain't no stopping.
All right, so there's obviously still some gain issues here, but I want to get a feel for what this kind of sounds like. Get a vibe for what this sounds like in the track. So I could also take like another approach here with this, which would be to lay out something that would be maybe go to like an E series. Go a little bit more late 70s. With an E series vibe. So let's go with the UAD and then just kind of do a quick setup here, just to kind of see if this, and this again, it's like really, really fast, and this is not meant to be like, oh, okay, is this like a permanent decision kind of thing, like nowhere near that. This is not something that I'm going to leave, just to be kind of clear. What I want to do is I want to get a sense of, if I do some basic things that I would probably do, equalization wise, on drums, for example, if I just get like a basic feel for it.
Enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can just start. We are standing just feet apart, not recognizing the reflection of a superstar. When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah, it's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. That's who we are. Ain't no stuff, just trust who you are. Trusting you, something that ain't nobody else.
So here on this, oops, sorry, I guess I got this on rotational. And I'm just kind of leaving this on a I'll use like a fast release.
When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. It's just what we have to do to just play the game. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. It's enlightening who we are.
Get some of those background vocals in there real quick and get a vibe for that.
When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah, it's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. That's who we are. Ain't stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are.
So this is our SSL approach. It's a gain difference here. Also more height there. See if I can make this a little bit more of a fair representation here.
When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah, it's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. That's who we are. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting you, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. That's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping.
So as I start to balance out the gain, you can hear more of the tonal variation and difference between the two. So there's a thing there. One other approach might be like an API approach. I could also have simplified this and done something overall on the master bus, and maybe that would have been like a kind of quicker way of going through it, where I could just kind of see this. I tend to work a little bit more with the stems because I can get a feel for what this is going to sound like with the drums, or what it's going to sound like with the lead vocal, or what it's going to sound like with this particular track. In a way, I kind of like more of the E channel vibe, even though it's a bit more mid-rangey. It seems like I like a bit more of the mid-range presence, and then probably I like some of the air aspects and low-end aspects of the Neve. So that might be like a good counter to kind of mix in on some of these things. But like another, like just like a quick, 'cause I don't want to do kind of drag this out forever and ever and ever, but I could just do like a quick um, uh, approach here on, so let's just say here that I kind of do, come on, there we go. Just
When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah, it's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. That's who we are. Ain't no stopping us. Who you are. Trusting no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us. When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah, it's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. That's who we are. Ain't no stopping.
So maybe what I'll do here then is to just to for the sake of kind of duplicating some of this, I'll start with the drums because that would be more of like a
When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah, it's just what
giving me a little bit more of the SSL vibe.
claim the
I'll try to do some similar boosts.
That's who we are. Ain't no stopping us. Who you are. Trusting no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us. Who you are. Trusting no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us.
And then do a similar kind of thing here with this guy. And I probably should have been a better approach here. Just to get the idea here.
When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah, it's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. That's who we are. Ain't no stopping us. Who you are. Trusting no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us. Who you are. Trusting no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us. Who you are. Trusting no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us. Ain't no stopping us.
So it's a more of a Neve approach. Still a little bit louder. And API.
Yes, we're winning. When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race.
There's obviously lots of balancing things. The background's too loud there.
It's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. That's who we are. Ain't no stopping us. Who you are. Trusting no
I think it seems like in this particular case, like the SSL seems to give the drive that we're looking for. And I think as a foundational thing, it seems like it's really going to balance out the mix really well. So I think this is where I want to, kind of take this approach. So this is more of like this SSL E series is more like late 70s, early 80s. And in terms of sound and vibe, I guess with the Black Knob, that's a little bit later, kind of mid 80s. Before G series kind of took over, like 86, 87, somewhere in that range. And which is a bit of an edgier sound, the G. So that would be like taking it more of a modern kind of approach. But I really like the SSL E series emulation here. Kind of gives like a bit of that kind of crunchy vibe, and then we can kind of select and work on different things to bring out more warmth or grit by mixing in Neve components, but it just didn't, like, the Neve just kind of bounced right off of it. Didn't seem to like really stick. Just seemed to be off a little bit, and this SSL seems to be a good match based off of the original sounds. We could go through other console types and all that sort of stuff, but I think, like, we could bring up a Harrison console and play around with that and do those types of things. But I think this, as like an overall approach, gives me an idea of like where I want to start with things in terms of the layout of the mix. So when I go over individual instrumentation and I start to lay out what's going on with the individual instrumentation, one of the things I want to look at in terms of mapping everything out is where I kind of want things to lay out. Like this, I think there is going to be a lot of depth in this mix. So as I kind of go through some of the different things, a lot of the kick and the bass is going to be very dry and up front, and a lot of that beat and those loops are going to be more drier and up front. That's the foundation of the groove is in these early tracks with these loops, the kick, the snare, the claps, and the hi-hats. And then the percussion and other things just kind of fill in, and as you're going from section to section, and we'll kind of balance those things out as we go along. The reverse stuff and the builds and all those effects types of things, that stuff is just filler. That's transitional stuff that's carrying me from section to section. The guitars, there are a couple of guitars here, guitar 2 and 3 here, which are a little bit wetter, but those two funky guitars, I want to keep a little bit drier and kind of up front. Not too dry, not too far up front, but it's going to kind of sit in the pocket with the rest of the drums. So it's going to kind of find a midway place in everything. So if I'm kind of laying this out from a mix mapping perspective, and I want to talk a little bit maybe about the top side perspective of this. So let me just open this up. Really, what I want to do is I want to have, that 4 on the floor, that kick is going to be, really upfront and dry in there. And then that kind of, the loop type of stuff that's behind it is going to kind of sit right there and behind it. The vocal will be up on top, but also kind of set back a little bit. The performance there is not necessarily driving the track forward. But as we get like a good sound for it, there's going to be a lot of reverb on that. There's going to be to bring some character into the voice. The backgrounds, by contrast, I think the BG vocals are going to be more upfront and kind of drier, because they're going to drive a lot of those chorus sections. So that really needs to kind of pull forward, and where they mix back a little bit so that the lead vocal has a space, I can actually make the lead vocal sound like a little bit bigger. This is not like a vocal sound where I want the vocal sound like really, really huge on top of the track. It's going to be in the groove, and that's sort of the way that the part kind of lays out. Now, when we get to things like the horns and the strings, this is where we're going to fill out the whole backside of the arrangement, where I can have those horns sound like it's a section coming from one side of the room, and then there's some synth part that maybe pulls a little bit more forward that complements the horns, but is a little bit smaller sounding and cuts through. And then there's the strings, which will kind of lay in the back there and bring in some depth. That Rhodes track is going to kind of sit somewhere behind the vocal, but in, behind this. So a lot of the depth is going to come from the horns and the strings and all the keys and stuff like that. The drive of the track, and especially that kick drum, is going to pull forward, and that bass kind of dry and up closer and forward, along with the guitar. So the key is really in all of this basic rhythm instrumentation and creating that really, really solid groove. So when these different elements come in at different distances and panning and different effects, it's like part of this groove. You're kind of creating this stage that has everything kind of laid out. So this is very different than like a performance kind of thing, where you might have the vocal very loud and big and up front, and then the band kind of behind it, because that takes away from sort of the club dance aspect of it, which I think is a much more important thing. If I look at it from the front side view, then the other front side view, that would be this one. There we go. Now this becomes really important, because this kick drum needs to sit really, really low in the speakers with the bass, like right there with it. Like those guys have to be really, really driving that energy. And part of the attack of the bass. There'll be enough of it up here to kind of cut through on smaller speakers, but this has to really sink downward to lay the space, because when we get to the keys, although in the back, those keys are like that Rhodes part is going to be kind of sitting in here in that space, like right up above it. The guitars, because they're brighter, will will kind of sit, maybe more towards the outside. Maybe I'll kind of pan them in a little bit, but I want them to sit up a little bit high, those funky guitars, and then let the other ones, the other guitars that are got more verbed out, will be kind of behind it, but sort of in a similar placement. Leave this space in the middle. So the vocal will sit up really high in the mix. We could set the vocal up really high. The background vocals will kind of sit somewhat in between, maybe in a little middle, or maybe they end up a little bit on the outside. I could spread them really wide if I wanted to create some width in the mix. I like those strings to sit up, like really kind of hold that air up over the top, and then horns over here or over here with that other synth part kind of off to the sides. So I'm kind of thinking like along these lines in terms of an overall approach. So what does this mean? When I'm looking at the front back stuff, I'm thinking about levels, I'm thinking about compression seam, and when I'm thinking about the up down, I'm thinking about frequency response and some of those characteristics. So I want some, maybe with these background vocals, there's a lot of air. This is going to have a tendency to shift them up higher. So I'm not sure how I want to deal with that. Maybe I'll let them be up high and let the vocals sink down a little bit lower on them. So we'll just have to see how that kind of plays out. But if there's a lot of very like top end air, it will have a tendency to raise that part up in the speakers. And if we got a lot of low warmth to the vocal, it'll create some size, so it'll become bigger in the overall scheme of this in the mix. The guitars, I think I have to sit a little bit lower in all of this in order for the background vocals to sit in this area. So I'm going to have to warm up those guitars while still kind of pulling them forward. In other words, don't make them too bright and brittle. I don't want it to step. I wanted to create a nice contrast, so when those background parts come in, the guitars are definitively rhythm section and those vocals are in front of it a little bit. But this whole percussion rhythm section, kick, like clap, like a lot of the percussion stuff is going to kind of sit in this middle area right here with varying widths, with the hi-hats and all that sort of stuff to kind of maintain this whole groove that all the other stuff kind of plays on top of. And now, I don't go through and physically draw these things out for every mix, although sometimes it's helpful. But I map it out in my head. So as I'm going along, I'm trying to think, it's like, okay, this will sound really cool if I place it here, if I go for this sound. So I have to decide on a lot of things. Like with the horns, they're stereo. I may want to mono them up so that they fit in like a certain place in the mix so they answer better to one of the other tracks. I don't have to stick to this. Like, in other words, if as I go through the mix, if I find something better or a formula that works better or just sounds better as I'm going through it, I'll roll with that. So in other words, if I have an idea in my mind of where I want to lay it out, but the process of mixing, it doesn't work or it doesn't feel right, then I'll say, okay, I need to change my approach or adapt it. So maybe I move the guitars this way or pan them wider or pull them in a little bit. And a lot of this is coming through the, the pan, like we did some balances with some levels, but also with the pan positions to get the interplay between the different instruments, how the shaker or the tambourine plays off the hi-hat, how the guitars complement each other. And so I'll show you how to be sensitive to those types of things. There's a lot of stuff here that layers and layers of stuff within all of this, and there's enough tracks to make it really interesting. But I think the SSL is kind of be the approach. Now, we could keep it very pure. Like if we listen to the raw tracks and we say that the tonal character is really there in the original tracks, maybe we want to stay more transparent and go with just like, FabFilter Pro Q2, like something more transparent like that in like a Pro C1 or something like that, and use that as my base layer where it's pretty transparent overall, and then I'm working with kind of digital compression and EQ just to kind of shape things. It's not unusual for there to be a formula where a lot of even like some mix of those two different things. Like if with the SSL, I do have some filtering, but I may find that the filtering on the SSL for high pass, low pass may not be good enough, and I may go to some other digital components to give me, more control over that for particular instruments if necessary. But I want to show you how to layer this in and kind of setting a vibe or a tonal character for it, and how important that is in establishing the mix, because that console type and that sonic signature is kind of, you can think of it like the canvas for the rest of the mix. So if I use that as a foundation for all of the basic stuff that I do, I may find it's like, okay, I don't like the way the high frequency boost works on the snare drum, let's say, with the SSL EQ, but now I can, if I add the Pultec, I get the Pultec character on that, and I get the better top end. And now I can be more selective about bringing in other vintage components and vintage compressors and finding what they match up well with. So it's not that I do everything with that console type and I use that compressor on everything, but I have that palette set up. So now when I put that Pultec on the snare stands out, or the claps stand out, or whatever the case is, or the kick stands out. And so for certain instruments like the kick, that's a huge part of what makes this track move. And if that's not sitting in the right place and really popping through, then the track is dead, because it's a 4 on the floor kind of disco track, and you have to kind of go with that vibe. So that's the foundation of it. So that's like a good thing. And now as we kind of go through this, if you don't kind of establish this sort of approach and you just start, going through tracks and EQing and compressing sort of randomly, then without that vision, you're just guessing all the way along. And because there's so many decisions along the way, it becomes like the old thing where they say, if you put a monkey in front of a typewriter, eventually he'll type all of Shakespeare's greatest works, but it may take like millions of years, and that's how long it will take you to do your mix if you take that type of monkey at the typewriter type of approach. You have to have a vision. You have to have an idea of where you want to go with things, where you want to lay them out, and to whatever degree you succeed or fail, you have to at least make that attempt, so that you can build off of your successes and build off of your failures and figure out how to make up for them. Really hugely important. So can't underestimate that as an important aspect of all of this. All right, that's the fundamentals of mixing. Lesson 13, mapping your mix, creating vision and approach. And that'll do it for lesson number 13.